Good afternoon, all, and thank you very much for joining this afternoon's session. This session is the webinar talking about complaints, and it's come about because as part of our resident sounding board, they've come up with a number of topics, and this is really, really key, important one which they've suggested we do a webinar on. So, I'd like to thank the sounding board for suggesting this. We've got speakers from government as well as other organisations today. So we've got speakers from DLUHC, and they're going to be talking about the policy context and the background to their current approach around complaints. Their strengthening powers of the Ombudsman service and their Make Things Right campaign. We've also got a representative from the Ombudsman service who will talk to the role of the Ombudsman and what it does and doesn't do, new powers under the Social Housing Regulation Act, and proposes the changes to the Complaint Handling Code. And we've also got a resident who's been involved in complaints handling as well as scrutiny arrangements around complaints. So it's really good to have a resident, speaking today as well. So without any further ado, I'm going to ask the speakers to introduce themselves briefly, and then they'll go on to do their presentations. But
thanks, Abraham. Hi, everyone. Really good to be here today. I work in the Department for Levelling Up in government as a civil servant in the campaigns team. And I'm here today to talk about the Make Things Right campaign, which aims to increase awareness of how to complain. And I'm going to be talking through some of the steps which we set out and also showing you our website.
Thank you, Tom. Polly?
Hello, my name is Polly Cox. I work for the Housing Ombudsman service. I'm the Sector Learning and Development Manager, and I'm in the process of creating the Centre for Learning, which I'll tell you a little bit more about at the end of my presentation. Thanks for having me here today.
Thank you, Polly. Nicole?
Yep, I'm Nicole Bickerdike. I work for the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities, and I focus on social housing redress, so all things complaints. And I work with my colleague Andrew, who I'll get to introduce himself.
Thank you, Andrew.
Hello, yes, I'm Andrew Dack. I lead the Social Housing Redress Policy and Sponsorship team. I'll start with a slight apology in that my camera doesn't seem to be working. I will continue to try and make it work, so if I do suddenly appear on your screen, I hope it's not too much of a jump scare for everybody. I lead the team that oversees the Housing Ombudsman service, working closely with the Housing Ombudsman himself, Rick Blakeway. We also deal with with redress policy. So we do a lot of the work around reforms that there have been in the social housing redress policy sphere over the last couple of years. And we also work closely with the Ombudsman following the publishing of things such as the severe maladministration cases and the paragraph 49 reports.
Thank you, Andrew. Lizzie?
Hi, my name is Lizzie Spring. I'm 69. I worked in the voluntary sector for about 40 years, including 5 or 6 years working in housing. I've rented from my current landlord for 11 years, and over that period I've put in 2 formal complaints. So I've been asked to speak about that. And I'd also like very much to speak about how we could use the huge resources of skills and professional experience within the tenant body, rather than purely looking at us as complainants, also how we can contribute as very expert policymakers. A lot of my friends, like myself, in our late 60s, early 70s, rent from social housing, but also have very long, successful careers with relevant skills. And I'd like to be able to look at how we can begin to feed into what you're doing as experts as well as beneficiaries, if that makes sense.
Lizzie, thank you very much. I'm sure there'll be scope and the time for us to cover some of the points you've raised. Last but not least, Helen.
Oh, good afternoon. My name's Helen Watkinson. My landlord is EMH Homes. I'm chair of the scrutiny panel, and we did a year-long investigation into complaints with a load of recommendations, which I'll talk about later. I'm also a Housing Ombudsman resident panel member, and I'm also part of the Social Regulators panel.
Thank you, Helen. Can I thank all the speakers for coming today? And I'm going to hand over to Andrew and Nicole.
Hello, everybody. I hope you can see the slides now. As I said in my introduction, I am Andrew Dack. I lead the Social Housing Sponsorship and Redress team in DLUHC, the Department for Levelling Up. In terms of a broad context, I am sure we all remember the events of the terrible Grenfell fire tragedy a few years back, which really put a spotlight on many of the issues which social housing residents have been facing for many years. Personally, as someone who grew up and has lived most of my life in social housing, this is all stuff that I feel is really important. So it's really important to me that we are making these changes over the last few years to improve the quality of life and access to redress, in particular for social housing residents. Much of the work on this started with the Social Housing White Paper and, of course, the Social Housing Charter for Social Housing Residents, which was published in November 2020. This sets out clearly what social housing residents should expect from their landlord, and redress is a key part of that. Hopefully, everyone on this call is aware of the process for making a complaint. We'll be talking about that more as the afternoon goes on. What we have set out in the Social Housing White Paper is how to ensure that residents have good quality and safe homes, and a voice to make sure that they're able to hold landlords to account. Many of the things that we did in the Social Housing White Paper have been contributing to this. So greater transparency in terms of publishing data around landlords and their delivery and their complaints. We are publishing, the Housing Ombudsman is publishing the results of all complaints now, which is new. And there have been other innovations. For example, the Housing Ombudsman's publishing of severe maladministration findings, the publishing of its Paragraph 49 reports, which are investigations into specific landlords, the most recent of which was Lambeth, which was published, I believe, yesterday. In Islington, it was published yesterday. So those are key outcomes from the Social Housing White Paper. One of the first significant changes we made was through the Building Safety Bill, or Building Safety Act, and from 2022, what was called the democratic filter was abolished. This was a previously existing barrier to residents to accessing the complaints process with the Ombudsman once they had been through the landlord's process. But that has now been abolished, so hopefully that allows quicker access to complaints for residents. We've also approved the Housing Ombudsman significantly increasing the scale of its staff. One thing that's become aware through increased awareness over recent months is because of the Grenfell fire tragedy, because of the horrific case of Awad Ishaq, but also because of our own awareness-raising activity, is that there has been an increase in demand for the Housing Ombudsman. This is a challenge for the Housing Ombudsman, and he's putting pressure on it. So the department has approved significant increases in their funding and through increased fees to increase the number of staff. Just over a couple of years ago, the Ombudsman had just around 120 staff. By the end of this programme of expansion, the Housing Ombudsman should have increased to just around 400 staff. So a significant scaling up to deal with the increased demand. This is, as awful as the individual complaints, a sign that actually this is having an impact. People are knowing how to complain and coming forward. And hopefully some of the things we're seeing through the publishing of severe maladministration and the Paragraph 49 reports is showing that we're having an impact.
So yeah, so Andrew was just talking about some of the context. So this led on to the Social Housing Regulation Act, which received royal assent in July of this year, so very recently. So yeah, this is going to deliver some great change across the sector. And we have strengthened the Housing Ombudsman in a few different ways. So we've given them a few different powers. The first one is about publishing guidance, best practice guidance, and to ask social landlords to complete a self-assessment against this guidance when a complaint is received. So the Housing Ombudsman already does publish some spotlight reports, but this will now be put on a statutory footing, and the self-assessment part is a new part of the process that landlords will need to complete. We've already kind of given them, we had already previously given them the power to investigate issues that go beyond single cases. It's kind of reinforced in the Act, but it's something we were already doing through their paragraph 49 investigations that Andrew just mentioned. We're also giving holds the power to monitor landlord compliance with the Complaint Handling Code, and that has been put in statute. And I know Polly's going to talk a bit about that later. And we have also expanded their order-making powers, so they can order a landlord to review their policies following a complaint. So those are some of the powers that we introduced as part of the Social Housing Regulation Act. So I'll move on to the next slide. So this kind of leads on to the raising awareness campaign, so the Make Things Right campaign. So yeah, this is a multi-year campaign which kind of came about when we spoke to residents a few years ago, and we found that there were some barriers on for residents on how to make a complaint. So some of those barriers were just not awareness of the process, low awareness of the Housing Ombudsman and who they were, and also just low awareness of how to make a complaint in the first place. So this is how the campaign came to be. So yeah, we want to ensure more social housing residents who need support know how to make a complaint, and it's also a good opportunity for us to talk about all the updates. So some of the things that Andrew's mentioned, to make complaining easier, and hopefully make things right in the process. So I'm going to hand over to Tom, who's going to talk through some of the detail of this year's campaign. So,
hi everyone. Yeah, so as I said, I'm Tom. I work in the Department for Levelling Up. I'm in the communications team, try to increase awareness of the complaints process and the number of people who decide to go through, make complaints, and eventually get results from that. So the basic idea of the campaign is one that everyone agrees on. Obviously, everyone deserves a safe and secure home. So this is kind of the why of the campaign that runs through all of it. And it's because we know that housing can have an impact on our health if something's not right. It can be stressful, it can cause physical or mental health problems if you're living in a home that isn't in a good condition. And there's in fact reports that come out each year saying how much it costs the NHS, how much poor housing quality costs the NHS. And the last time that came out this year, it said it was £1.4 billion a year. So that's a big impact, and a big impact on individuals. So the final reason why we're doing another one of these campaigns, as this is the 4th year, is it has made a difference. In March, we ran the last campaign, and complaints to the Housing Ombudsman and to landlords increased. Someone's mic, I think, has come off, and there's some sound coming through. So the reason, so it's increased the number of complaints we had in March by 20% to the Housing Ombudsman and landlords compared to the month before. And that basically means more people are raising issues that either didn't feel like it was kind of worth it, is one of the things we're trying to overcome, or they just were deciding not to. So I'll just move on to the next slide. So the campaign really sets out 3 steps to take to report an issue and to make complaints. And we're aiming to increase the knowledge so people know how to complain, make sure people know they will be heard and there are ways to do that, and that you can escalate complaints to the Housing Ombudsman, which really is the step where the knowledge about that option, if you get stuck with a landlord not doing what you'd like, knowing that option is there can really help. And the types of issues that this can be used for is repairs like mold or damp, poor insulation, broken doors or windows, other repairs, as well as antisocial behaviour and access problems. Let's say if you have a disability and you need adaptations to your home and they're not being done, as well as poor service from your landlord. So there's 3 steps which we set out, which are report, complain, and escalate. And I'm going to talk you through from the kind of top to the bottom of one of our posters through those steps. Now, some of you may know about this already, you may have experience in the process already, but what we have here, perhaps if you do already know about it, is something you can share with people who might know less about it and therefore help them raise their issues. So number 1 is report it to your landlord. So most landlords have a website with a form or an email address or a telephone number which you can use. If you live in council housing, then you'll be contacting your council. If you live in a housing association, you'll be contacting them and getting those details from either your contract or correspondence like letters and emails with them. So the second one is complain to your landlord if you're still not happy. So landlords must take your complaint seriously and they cannot punish you. Nicole and Andrew mentioned some of the work that's been done to make sure there are the powers there to stop that happening. So they must take the complaint seriously. And at this stage, there are 2 stages to their processes. The first one, they must respond within 10 days of logging the complaint. And the second one, they must respond within 20 working days. Now, a landlord will send you a final response, which may set out how they will fix the issue. And the third option, after report and complain, is escalate. So escalate to the Housing Ombudsman if you're not happy with your landlord's final response. They are free to use. Polly's on the call and we'll be talking later from the Housing Ombudsman. They're impartial and they'll investigate fairly. They're investigating, so also can take time, and there's information about that on our website. I think the average now is around 6 months. But they're a place people can go. They are thorough. They will ask for evidence, and they're there for you. The landlord isn't putting things right to escalate your complaint. The final thing I'll say is please share this with your neighbours, friends, and even if you feel comfortable, encourage your landlords to put it on their websites, perhaps their letters and emails at the end of those as well. There's a link lower down that webpage which has posters, leaflets, and other things you can download and print, including in other languages, as you can see across the top of the website here. But the main thing to take away, take a look at the website and explore the advice that it contains. So yeah, report, complain, escalate is our main message. And thank you for listening.
I thank Tom and Nicola and Andrew. And can I hand the next session over through to Polly? Polly's going to be talking about the role of the Housing Ombudsman Service and recent changes under the legislation, under the the act that just passed. So, Polly, over to you.
Okay, right, brilliant. Okie dokie. So I'm just going to talk about a little bit about what the Ombudsman Service is doing currently, changes to the code, and I'll try not to duplicate too much from the previous presentation. So firstly, I'm just going to show you a short video infogram of what the Housing Ombudsman Service it currently does.
What is the Housing Ombudsman Service and what does the service do? Our role is to make the final decision on disputes between residents and member landlords. Our decisions are independent, impartial and fair. We support resident-landlord disputes by including the landlord and others. We want to promote positive change in the housing sector. It's a free service to residents of member landlords. Our role is set out in the Housing Act 1996 and the Housing Ombudsman Scheme. Membership of the Housing Ombudsman Scheme is mandatory for social landlords. We also have some private landlords who choose to be members. Our vision is to improve resident lives and landlord services through housing complaints. Our values are fairness, we're independent and impartial. Learning, we share knowledge and insights to impact and improve services. Openness, we're accessible and accountable. Excellence, we work together to give an efficient, high-quality service. You can get in contact with us by calling 0300 111 3000 Monday to Friday, 9:15 AM to 5:15 PM, or emailing us at post@housing-ombudsman.org.uk, or see our website www.housing-ombudsman.org.uk.
Okay, I get it to move on.
What is the housing?
You don't want to watch it again. So, as you've just heard from the short video there, that we're independent, we're impartial, and we're free. So, if a resident's not happy with the complaint that they've made to their landlord, then they can come to us. But there are certain things that we won't be able to help with, and so I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about that now, because there are some things which are outside our jurisdiction. And so, for example, we wouldn't be able to help out if your landlord was not a member of the scheme, or that the complainant doesn't have a landlord or tenant relationship, and that includes leaseholders. So we also might not be able to consider complaints that have been made prior to having exhausted the landlord's complaint procedure. So if you're still in that process, say at stage 1, then you'd have to wait till you'd got your final response after your stage 2 from your landlord, and then it could come to us. Sometimes we aren't able to consider complaints that involved problems with the level of service charges. And it's difficult for us to be involved as well where either party has started legal action. But you can also find more examples of the types of decisions that we can't support, which they're included in the paragraph 41 of the Housing Ombudsman Scheme. But just remember that it's not a checklist, and that each complaint should be and is considered on the facts of the individual case. So if you wanted to make a complaint, what you need to do is firstly check that your landlord is a member of the scheme, go through their internal complaints process and get your final response from them, and then you can contact the Housing Ombudsman Service. So just going to talk a little bit about the code, and that was first introduced in 2020, and things that are really key in that code, that it has that universal definition of a complaint that all landlords should be using. And it explains about that it's important to give residents that easy access to our service, and that it shouldn't be hidden. So when landlords are writing out to you, when they're giving you their response to their complaints, they should also be giving you our information. It also is quite clear in the complaint handling code about the structure of the complaint process, and that having that stage 1 and that stage 2, and those in unusual circumstances when perhaps there is a stage 3 process, then landlords should be explaining why they have that 3-stage process in their annual self-assessment, and giving evidence as to why that works. Otherwise, they should be sticking to that 2-stage process. It also is very clear about that landlords should be taking action to put things right and to have those appropriate remedies. Because obviously, if it's very different depending on who's living in that property and any vulnerabilities that the household members may have. The complaint handling code is also about creating that positive complaint handling culture, and that complaints are useful to landlords because it allows them to see where things are going wrong, because that enables them to put things right. If you don't know what's going wrong, how can you make sure you're providing a really good service? And again, that sort of follows on with that embedding that continuous learning and that improvement. So when you find out through complaints that things are going wrong, if you then make those changes, that continuously improves the service that you're providing. And the code also asks for landlords to demonstrate that learning in annual reports to tenants. And as I just mentioned earlier, there's that annual self-assessment check against the code that all landlords should be completing and then publicising. If they have a website, if they haven't a website, then they should be finding other ways in which to ensure that residents have the opportunity to see that self-assessment against the code. So since bringing in the code in 2020, we've been doing lots of work on it, and we've been changing as DLUHC mentioned earlier, there have been some changes in the types of determinations that we can make. And so one of the areas that we're doing is the complaint handling failure orders. So these are issued via our dispute support teams, and they generally relate to responding to complaints. So they're the type 1 complaint handling failure orders that we set out. Then we have type 2 complaint handling failure orders, which are mostly used in our triage section. So this is where landlords have failed to provide evidence within a timely manner, as set out by us. So when a complaint comes in, we obviously ask the landlord to provide us with evidence so we can then investigate and see if it needs to be taken further. But if landlords then fail to provide that evidence for us for whatever reason, then at that point, once we've given them a reasonable amount of time to provide that, if they don't, then we can have a complaint handling failure order as a type 2. And then finally, we have the most serious of the complaint handling failure orders, which is the type 3 complaints. And that's where that's the orders that are looked at by our insight and development team, and that's usually where there's significant evidence that a failure to comply with the code, and that's or more generally in terms of failure to comply with the scheme. So we also provide our insight and spotlight reports, as I mentioned earlier, that we publish those on a quarterly. The insight reports on a quarterly basis, and it also we encompass the complaint handling failure order report, which is, as I've just mentioned, has gone under significant review, so that's much easier to find. And again, if you go onto our webpage, you'll be able to access those easily from the Centre for Learning drop-down box. And in there, we also put in sort of where we've done our interventions, which is both for individual cases and for wider landlords and wider failures across the system. So as also mentioned earlier, we've been successful in lobbying the government for enhanced powers. So we're really wanting to use our values to make changes and use the code as a tool to ensure that things like Grenfell, Rochdale, don't happen again. And we've had a 50% increase in demand in our services since 2020, hence the huge recruitment within the Ombudsman service. And obviously Rick Blakeway, who's our Ombudsman, he's been working with DLUHC to try and strengthen, and these have come through the Social Housing Regulation Act. So just very briefly, because I know that these have already been mentioned, but sometimes it helps if you hear things twice. So it's putting the code on a statutory footing, and that means, and the difference really is, it means landlords are going to be legally bound to comply with the orders and the recommendations that the Ombudsman Service is making. So at the moment, it's very much best practice, and that we really urge landlords to make those changes. That, but by putting it on a statutory footing, it means that landlords will be legally bound. The duty to monitor aspect, that gives us the ability to monitor compliance and also act if landlords don't comply. So at the moment, if we're asking a landlord that they really need to make changes to their service and the way that they're managing their complaints, they can tell us that they're doing that, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they are. We're also developing good practice. So coming into force, we will be able to develop a framework so we can then issue good practice to the sector, and then we can ask landlords to self-assess against that, and then give us the evidence that they have done that and what they're going to do in terms of action plans. And also we have wider orders which are aiming to sort of tackle those root causes that contributed to that sort of service failure. So, for example, if there was a particular weakness in a policy or there's some poor practice, if it's unaddressed, it could give rise to other residents experiencing detriment. And so those wider orders, it's that more strategic, and it builds on the work that we've already been doing. And then we will also then be publicising what we've taken from that, so other landlords can take that information and learn to ensure that it doesn't happen within their organisation too. So currently we are consulting on our revised version of the joint code. So we have reviewed the current code, which was last done in October 2022, and that's when we removed that designated person and that 8-week wait. And at that point, we did see a spike in referrals being made to us, but we're now conducting a full consultation on the code again. And we're reviewing all the work that we've done. Now, that consultation is in process at the moment. It ends on the 23rd of November. So we are encouraging landlords and residents to be able to go on. So if anybody here does wish to go on and have their say on that consultation, then again, go onto the Housing Ombudsman website. It's there's a banner along the top of the screen, and you can click on there and you can give us your feedback. So aside from asking residents for their feedback, obviously we also need to, there are 3 statutory groups that we're bound to consult with. So that will include the member landlords, and obviously it makes sense that they need to feedback to us, because it will change the way that they're operating and how we're asking them to deliver the service. As I've just mentioned, we want residents to give us their feedback, because at the end of the day, they're the people who are the ones that are making the complaints, and it's the services that they receive is at the heart of what of why we have that code. And also the regulator, and we've been having regular meetings with them to ensure that they know what we're doing and that we're working closely together on that. So we're also part of the consultation that we're doing at the moment. So we've done 2 joint webinars with the LGSCO, which is the Local Government and Social Care Ombudsman, who are having that code. We will have a joint code, which we've not had before. And so at the moment, we've had at least just over 900 organisations have attended those 2 webinars. So they've been able to ask us their questions, and we can take their feedback. We've also had 2 sessions with our resident panel, and we have a session coming up with TPAS and HQN in the next couple of weeks. So that's okay. So as I mentioned, it was a joint code. So this is significantly different to what we've had before. But in terms for our member landlords, it's not going to be a huge change. So we don't think it will significantly impact, but there were some areas that will be beneficial to us. So, for example, one of the things that we have put in the revised code is to have that consistency of timescales across social housing. So that's regardless of your landlord. So that's really, I think that's really powerful, a really powerful change for the betterment of residents. So it helps residents to understand and know their rights, and it ensures there's a consistency. And I think that's particularly important where we've seen cases where we've got a street that's perhaps pepper potted with different landlords. They're all residents, they're all experiencing antisocial behaviour. but they're all receiving a different response and a different remedy, because there is no one way of looking at it. So we've also agreed to extend the timescale for landlords to accept complaints from 6 months to 12 months. And we're reiterating in the code that there must be a two-stage complaints process, and the aim of this is to reduce the time for residents to be able to access, or for individuals to access, dispute resolution via the relevant Ombudsman service. We're aware that of independent adjudicator arrangements who sometimes act as like a stage 3, or they've been referred to a stage 3 because a contractor perhaps done stage 1, but they haven't done a very efficient job because they're not part of the landlord organisation. So you end up having 3 stages, and that prolongs it for the resident. At the end of the day, we want resolution for the resident, because this is the residents that are living in the homes with the issues. And we've also followed up with some improved oversight and transparency around complaint handling across councils and social housing providers. So part of the code is we've asked landlords to complete the self-assessment, asking them to review their current approaches and policies against the code to ensure that they're meeting them, and then setting out any reasons that they may not be. And also under the new proposals, we've kind of gone a stage further, and that's to include an annual complaint handling data return. So that would include information about the number of complaints received, those that have responded, that's been responded to within target timescales, and the number and the proportion of the complaints which have been excluded from the process and why. And the aim of that really is to increase that transparency and accountability of landlords to their residents. And that's expected that they'll be producing that at least annually alongside any other information that might be that the landlord is producing. And also to provide that qualitative commentary alongside it that's related to that complaint handling. So that's what we've got in the proposals for this year for the complaint for the code. I'm just cheekily also going to tell you a bit about our Centre for Learning, because that's what I'm responsible for. So any opportunity I will take advantage of that. Just to say that we are developing the Centre for Learning, which will be the central place where landlords and residents will be able to go, and they will be able to find a whole host of different ways of learning and podcasts and case studies and reports and webinars, and it will all be in one place. So you'll be able to say, I don't know what's happening about damp and mould, and you'll be able to look at damp and mould, and there'll be frequently asked questions, some e-learning, virtual classroom potentially, and you'll be able to access that and take all of that information, and landlords will be able to use that to inform the work that they're doing and to improve that complaint handling culture.
Over to you, Helen.
Oh, good afternoon. For those of you that might have missed the start of it, my name's Helen Watkinson. I'm a scrutiny panel chair. I'm a member of the Housing Ombudsman's resident team, and a social regulator panel member as well. I think if we start on my history, especially with its complaints, in 2022, the scrutiny panel did a year-long investigation into complaints. We took this to the board in March with 40 recommendations, with areas that we weren't satisfied with. And the whole difference this time, which a lot of you know about scrutiny panels, is that we used to just do the recommendations, leave it with the landlord, and then revisit it a year later to see what they're doing. This one we've actually done completely different. And we've literally, since March, been working on these 40 recommendations. And it's like, it's not just tell us what you're doing, it's literally been show us what we're doing. So in the last 6 months, we've got these 40 recommendations down to 12 that's outstanding. But they're all tied up with a big project that we've got. One of the things that we took out and been working with resident involvement is to expand our lessons learned programme and make sure that these lessons learned are not just shared in the department, they're not just shared with board, they're actually shared with involved residents, and we have a say. And the other thing that's happened is a year ago we were sitting on stage 2 panel hearings, and that stopped because of the backlog. So we're like, let them get on with it, get us compliant with the actual cases so that we was in the timeframes. But now with the complaints process going through properly, what we're now doing is, as I say, we're now having these resident complaints champions set up. And basically it's like we'll be there for the landlords to use our knowledge, and for a resident, if they're not happy with the response, they can come back to us and say, do you really think they were fair? You know, before, it doesn't stop them going to the Housing Ombudsman, but obviously, you know, a lot of residents think, well, is that right? So we said, well, you know, we're all Housing Ombudsman experts by now, so we'll look at you and advise you. I did have a gentleman when I went out on a visit that had an issue. I looked at it. I didn't think the stage 2 response was fair. So I literally went back and said, I'm sorry, I think you've made a mistake. Can you re-look at it?
I'll hand this over to you, Lizzie.
My name's Lizzie Spring. I'm a retired voluntary sector chief exec, and I've also worked in housing, again at chief exec level, for a very small housing association a long time ago. My landlord is very small, but I've rented from 2 or 3 huge ones as well in the past. So I don't think the problems with landlords are to do with their size, but I do think a lot of their problems are to do with the capacity of the staff to deal professionally with their work. I hope nobody in the room who works within social housing, because what I'm about to say is not very flattering. I think it is an extraordinarily low-skilled sector. And parallel to that, I think that what is missing in this entire debate about complaints and the Ombudsman and the regulator getting more and more and more high profile, which is wonderful and I'm very pleased about, is the level of intelligent professional skill within the tenant body is being completely missed out of the conversation. I personally have put in 2 complaints to my landlord over an 11-year period, which is therefore very few. But each of those complaints followed years of trying to redress the problem myself alongside my neighbours. And finally, the first time I did a complaint, we'd been trying to do something for 3 years to improve our landlord's practice. Then it took a year for the complaint process. The second time I'm still involved in, so I'm not going to describe it because I might steel myself to go to the Ombudsman, though it's intensely demeaning to do so, to be honest. I'd much rather have an adult, respected conversation with my landlord. What has come through for me each time I've interacted with my landlord for myself, or when I was the chair of the Tenants Association for other people, is 3 things. The low skill of the responses, these massive, verbose, garrulous, fake legalese responses that you get to try and silence tenants. The callousness and indifference to the distress that people experience before making a complaint and during it. And thirdly, the fact that so many tenants had the skills to actually help the landlord improve, but we are heavily excluded from any role of genuine influence. I don't mean panels or any other system created by and controlled by the landlord, but our own separate and frequently much more highly trained skill base is not being used. And my suggestion, which I have made to the Ombudsman within the resident panel, but I don't think I expressed it clearly because it wasn't picked up at all, is to have a third leg to the stool. You know, the Liz Warren little phrase, if you're not round the table, are you sure you're not on the menu? I feel that we need to have a national tenants federation. We have a brilliant London Tenants Federation, and there's one in Manchester as well. But we need to have a national tenants federation, which is the third leg of the stool, where we work alongside the Ombudsman and the regulator with paid staff who are tenants, especially the senior level ones, with relevant skills, like myself and thousands of others of us, who can then work alongside the regulator and the Ombudsman to provide legal support and advice to other tenants, to do consciousness raising campaigns like the one you're doing, but possibly without the cartoons and the very calm, kindly voices, but actually done as adult to adult, and where we are able to oversee, review, and make recommendations about the landlords.
Next speaker will be Leah. Leah, do you want to introduce yourself, please?
Hi everybody, I'm Leah. I am a tenant of Cobalt Housing, and I'm also a member on the Tenant Consultative Panel. I have previously been a member on this scrutiny panel, but they don't actually run one anymore. I do a lot for the community. I'm really involved within community and resident involvement. So yeah, that's me.
Thank you, Leah. Both your contributions will be greatly valued.
Hi. So originally I was going to come on and tell you about my complaint that I made, but I've tweaked it a bit now. So as a member of the Tenants Consultative Panel within my housing association, we deal with new contracts that are coming up. We oversee them as tenants ourselves, to make sure that obviously it's going through as a tenant's perspective, that we can look at it first and we agree to it, so that obviously us as tenants can allow it. But we did get asked to do a review of the resident involvement, the complaints procedure, basically to tweak up everything that they have to do with resident involvement. So I took the complaints policy on myself and obviously overlooked everything. I focused on looking how easy it was to put a complaint in, how the setup was, what it is, what would you class as a complaint? Would it be relevant as a complaint, or would it just be sort of a repair that was getting sort of replace it all the time? Because sometimes it can cause conflict. What is a complaint and what? So anyway, I looked at other websites, compared them, and with me putting a complaint in myself, I obviously had to follow the complaint procedure, and everything that I seen from a tenant's perspective was in line with everything I did, sort of you would expect to go through with the complaint procedure. The person that was handling the complaints, I got the name of, there was a reference number given. I was always informed of what was going to happen next, and I ended up getting resolved, and ended up getting obviously the repair fix and compensation at the end of it as well. So yeah, that was my story.
Thank you, Leah. So what you described is kind of like the difference between a complaint and a repair, and also how you had to navigate the complaints process and the resolution. So that's really helpful.
Yeah.
Well, most people don't get the same experience that you have, but again, it's about learning from each other and looking at how best it is to try and support that process.
Yeah.
So thank you. Can I hand over to Helen Barrett to do the closing statements and wrap up. But before that, can I thank everybody who's contributed to today's session, particularly the residents who you've taken the time up and you've asked some real interesting, challenging questions, and from the Ombudsman and government for taking the time to, give us an insight and learnings. So Helen, over to you.
Just to say, because we're a little bit over, for those who haven't joined us before, there's lots of, we've got loads of activities going on. We have a monthly webinar. The next ones are going to be on neighbourhood management. That's going to be at the end of November. And the one in December is going to be on energy efficiency and net zero. So if you're interested in joining those, we'll be sending up a newsletter. Make sure you're signed up to our newsletter. And in general, all of our information is available on our website, www.4millionhomes.org. There's loads of advice, guidance, support. You can book onto our in-person trainings, our online trainings, our webinar content. So that's really the best place to go. And of course, if you've got any questions, you can just get in touch with me, info@4millionhomes.org, to kind of to ask anything or to raise anything that you'd like to see. The last thing that I'm going to ask you to do, actually, and I'm going to share it, we collect feedback from all our events. And we use that both to improve the programme and see what residents are enjoying and not enjoying and what they want to see going forward. And we also use it to kind of feedback to our funders, who are the department. So if you could take it really quick, it's a really quick survey. If anyone is on their computer and has their phone, I'm going to share the screen and you can take a photo of the QR code and that will take you straight to the survey. And if people don't, and because I know loads of people are are working from their phones now, I'm also, can you see that on your screen? Someone want to give me a nod? See the QR code? Great. Yep. I'm also going to bring up the chat and I'm going to pop it in the chat. And if people were happy to just spend the next 2 minutes after they finish this webinar and we've closed, just filling that in, that would be really, really useful for us. So yeah, other than that, just to say thank you all so much for coming and being here with us this afternoon. It's great to see, I can see from the comments that some people are finding it useful. Yeah, really hope that most of you have found it useful. But as I say, if there's anything that you think we should have covered or anything else you'd like to see, please just get in touch. We're running the programme for another, till March 2025. So we've got lots of opportunity to kind of expand and develop on what we're doing. So thanks so much to everybody. And we'll say bye for now.